Welcome to the Pulsating Biology, and in today's video we are starting another chapter, that is the gases exchange. Earlier we are done with the human respiratory system, which is almost interlinked with this chapter, but it has several more pointers that are included in your O-level syllabus. Well, let's begin with it. When you talk about the gases exchange, you need to understand that gases exchange is a biological process. It is a biological process basically through which the gases exchange occurs. The gases exchange between what? The gases exchange between an organism and between an environment is termed as the gases exchange or the respiratory system in the human being. They move across the respiratory surfaces basically to the different parts of the body, and the parts of those respiratory system I'm going to explain that those with the help of a diagram. Firstly, let's discuss about the gases exchange in a much more detail. Well, the gases exchange is essential for facilitating different cellular and respiratory or metabolic activities that basically take place in a body. Those metabolic activities that are related to the respiration are very important for the gases exchange to take place. Okay. The next pointer actually tells us that how does the gases exchange occurs. So gases exchange mainly occurs through a process that is known as the diffusion. However, it varies on the kind of the organism we are talking about. But mainly gases exchange takes place through a diffusion. What is the diffusion? Diffusion is nothing but just a transport mechanism or a transport process, you can say, which means the diffusion means the movement of gaseous molecules from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration down a concentration gradient. This is what the diffusion means, and this is just a mechanism of transport through which basically the gases exchange takes place. This is all you need to learn about the gases exchange, and it covers almost all the pointers that are present in your syllabus. Understand the human gases exchange system in a much more detail with the help of this diagram. When you talk about the human gas exchange, you need to understand that it involves two lungs, basically in the thorax region, and then after the thorax region, below the thorax region, like below the diaphragm, it starts the abdominal region. We are first going to talk about the thorax region, in which it includes the two lungs and the air passage basically that leads to those two lungs. The air passage consists of what? It consists of the nasal passage that consists of the two external nostrils, then the pharynx, then the larynx, then the trachea, then the bronchi, and then the bronchioles that give rise to all kinds of the alveoli. Let's understand it with the help of labeling this diagram. So basically the air passage starts with a nasal passage that consists of the two external nostrils. The nasal passage leads to the pharynx, and then the pharynx, it leads to the larynx, which is basically the voice box, larynx, and then it leads to the trachea. Trachea is just another name for the windpipe, which helps us basically to transport the air into the lungs. Once the air passes through the trachea, it reaches to the bronchioles. The bronchioles basically, the two bronchi basically the bifurcates into two lungs, the right lung and the left lung. So the lobes are basically different in the right and the left lung, but those are not included in the respiratory system. We're going to talk about the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity consists of a diaphragm, which is a muscular muscle that is present beneath the lungs. It consists of the intercostal muscle. In the intercostal muscle, we have two kinds of the muscle, the external intercostal muscle and the internal intercostal muscle. What are they? We're going to talk about that. So you consist of the internal intercostal muscle and the external intercostal muscle. The one that are present on the outside we say are the external intercostal muscle, and on the inside we say are the internal intercostal muscle that basically copes up with all the ribs that are coming from the sternum. Okay. Other than that, the bronchioles give rise to the alveoli. Alveoli are very important structure when it comes to the gases exchange, since most of the gases exchange take place in the alveoli. Alright. Between these two lungs, we have a heart that is present, that is protected with the ribs that are coming from the sternum. This is the entire lungs or the entire gases exchange system that you need to learn in this diagram. We move forward. Let's understand in a very similar manner that how these structures are important and gives importance to the human gases exchange. When you talk about the nasal passage that consists of the nose and the two external nostrils, basically the air enters into the body through the two external nostrils that comes into the nasal passage. They perform several functions, and those several functions include basically trapping of the dust and the foreign particles, and protecting the body from all the harmful chemicals. That they basically detect all the small sensory harmful chemicals that can enter into the body and act as a defense line. This line of defense is very important for the body in order to protect all kinds of the chemicals and the anti-agents or the foreign particles to enter into the, or the bacteria to enter into the nasal passage. After that, the trachea. When you talk about the trachea consists of the two kinds of the cell, the gland cells and the ciliated cells. These two cells plays a very important role. When you talk about the gland cell, they secrete mucus. What is the mucus? Mucus is basically a structure that helps us to trap all the dust particles. When you talk about the ciliated cells have hair-like structures that are known as the cilia. These are some sort of like hair-like structures that basically traps all the dust particles. It sweeps the dust trap into the mucus. Then when you talk about the alveoli, in the alveoli basically all the gases exchange system takes place because it has a very large surface area to volume ratio. When you talk about the bronchi and the bronchioles plays an important role as they are very fine tubes that are repeatedly branched into another, and it gives rise to a very important structure that is termed as the alveoli. Other than that, we have external intercostal muscle, internal intercostal muscle, the diaphragm, the ribs, and the entire intercellular cavity that helps in the two kinds of the processes. What are those two kinds of the processes? Those are the inspiration and the expiration, the taking in of the air and the exerting out of the air. These are the two processes. Firstly, let's understand what is the inspiration. The inspiration is basically the taking in of the air or taking in the oxygen into the human body. How this inspiration occur and how all the organs or all the structures that are involved in the human gases exchange basically plays a role in order to inspire the oxygen. Let's talk about the diaphragm first. Diaphragm is the muscular muscle that is present beneath the lungs that I have already shown you. This is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is beneath the lungs. That is a muscular layer that is either dome shaped or is flattened. Now let's understand either it is domed or flattened when it comes to the inspiration and how it differs when it comes to the expiration. When you talk about inspiration, the diaphragm basically contracts and it flattens. Originally, diaphragm is dome shaped, but whenever you inspire something, it contracts and also it becomes flattens. Next, let's talk about the external intercostal muscle and the internal intercostal muscle. When you talk about the external intercostal muscle, we say that the external intercostal muscle contracts and the internal intercostal muscle relaxes. Both of them work contradictory to one another. When one contracts, the other relaxes, and when other relaxes, the one contract. This is the internal and the external intercostal muscle. The one that is present on the outside is the external, and the one that is present in the inside is termed as the internal intercostal muscle. Well, after the internal and the external costal muscle, let's talk about the ribs. Ribs are the structure that basically protects the heart that is present beneath the lungs and also gives support to the lungs. When you talk about the ribs, whenever we inspire something, they move upward and they move outward. They move upward and they move outward. After ribs, let's talk about the volume. What difference does occur whenever you inspire something? For example, the normal volume of a lung are 5 liters. Whenever you want to inspire something, that means your lung needs to make up the space. So what happens? Whenever you inspire the oxygen, the thoracic cavity increases as more amount of the oxygen is going to come and elongated with the 5 liter that is already present. But when you talk about the atmospheric pressure is the pressure that is present in the environment. That atmospheric pressure decreases as the oxygen that was present in the atmosphere is basically inhaled by you. These are some of the structures that are involved in the human respiratory system when it comes to the inspiration. When you talk about the diaphragm, it contracts and it flattens. Originally, it is dome shaped. The internal intercostal muscle consists of the external and the internal. External intercostal muscle contract while the internal intercostal muscle relaxes. Both of them work contradictory to one another. When you talk about the ribs are the structures that basically protects the heart and comes from the sternum. They move upward and they move outward. And the volume increases and the atmospheric pressure decreases. Next, we have the expiration. When you talk about the expiration, it means the releasing out of the carbon dioxide from the body. This releasing contains of many introductory structures that are present. Let's begin with diaphragm as we have already discussed in the inspiration. When you talk about the diaphragm, as I've already told you, the diaphragm is originally dome shaped, so it remained dome shaped, but it relaxes. Whenever it is a dome shape, it basically relaxes because its original position is also dome. Next, when you talk about the intercostal muscles, those intercostal muscles, as we all know, consist of the two intercostal muscle, the external and the internal. So, whenever this happens, the external intercostal muscle contract and the internal intercostal muscle relaxes. Then we have the ribs. Ribs move downward and they move inward. What is the function of rib? We have already discussed when we were talking about the inspiration. Lastly, we have the volume and the atmospheric pressure. So when you talk about the volume, since we are expiring out something from our body, we say that the volume decreases. But whenever we talk about the atmospheric pressure, we are adding something into the environment. We say that atmospheric pressure, whenever we expire, it increases. Before we end the video, you need to understand one last thing, that is the human respiratory system occurs in the region of the thorax. The upper region of the body is termed as the thorax, while below the human respiratory system, it begins with the abdomen. So all of these structures are included in the thorax, and human gas respiratory system includes all the structures that are present in the thoracic region, starting from the nasal passage to the diaphragm. And after that, the abdomen starts. Here we are done with the first lecture of the gas section. If you have any question, you can ask in the comment section below.